Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's Friday evening. It is May 14th, 2021. Welcome to Cannabis Equity with Cynthia Mompoint. And this evening, we're going to recap what we saw happen in Massachusetts. Massachusetts held its monthly the monthly commission meeting. So the commissioners meet once a month, usually to go over the licenses and discuss any policy issues that need voting decisions, in which that involves more than two of the commissioners. So they do this once a month, and that took place yesterday. And so this evening, we're going to take a little bit of a look at that and reflect on it through the lens of equity, because we're not seeing that when we see the types of recap and updates from other sectors, other folks speaking on what's happening in this industry. Equity tends to get the short end of the stick. And so we want to bring that to the forefront and refocus on Massachusetts, because Massachusetts does identify itself as being first in the nation to legislate equity. We do have a mandate to promote equitable participation across the industry, and a lot of other industries, as they are rolling out, they look to Massachusetts to see what's working, what are we doing, and what can they glean from it. And a lot of states who have already gone legal are now backtracking and trying to see what can they do in the space of social equity to promote more equitable participation. So with that, this evening we're going to look at the data as usual. Where Massachusetts is have we moved the needle in equity? We're going to also take a look at, I'm going to just chime in a bit on registered agents. Oh, Facebook, you do not want to be great this evening, huh? All right, we're going to chime in on, take a look at commentary on registered agents here in Massachusetts and how that can be a tool to promote accountability, transparency, and then wrap it up with a look at the positive impact plans, because in yesterday's meeting, we did see the social justice chair, who is a new commissioner. This is not the same commissioner that the inaugural social justice commissioner. This is a new commissioner, Commissioner Camargo, who took it upon herself to be explicit in terms of her expectations and the actions that she's taking moving forward when it comes to the positive impact plans. What are our thoughts on what she had to say in terms of how will this move the needle on equity? Are we going to see the type of participation that is something that can be touted and promoted and really gets at starting to chip away at some of the harms done by the war on drugs that continues to persist in our communities? Okay, Facebook, glad you were able to make it back with us. And so if you are tracking with us on Facebook and having difficulty staying connected, we are also streaming this on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. The handle is still the same. We're using the Mass Mother Mary platform. And you can also check out our blog, where we'll recap some of the information that we share on our equity minutes. So let's just jump in. The data around businesses that are operational, we're looking at 233 businesses in Massachusetts are operational. Of those 233 businesses, we have 8 of them are owned by equity program participants, whether that's a social equity program participant or an economic empowerment certificate holder. 8 out of 233 that are operational. That's we're looking at 3%, roughly 3%, which, when you think about the mandate for equitable participation, we have to ask ourselves, are we rolling out policy? Are we enforcing actions that are going to promote equitable participation? And here it is, fast forward 3 years, and we're only at 3%. Where are we dropping the ball? Now, if you have been tracking with us, we've identified a lot of the missteps that have taken place in Massachusetts, and we continue to highlight opportunities for growth, solutions that we have put, that I have drafted and presented both to the Cannabis Advisory Board and the Cannabis Advisory Board, then in turn presented that to the Cannabis Control Commission, that being the PIES program, as a tangible solution to addressing the needle that we want to see move, addressing the lack of participation in the ownership space when it comes to cannabis businesses in Massachusetts. One of the things, when you look at the CCC's monthly meeting, the executive director, Sean P. Collins, he provides an update. He provides almost a data dump. A lot of this data is available on the CCC's website. They have a data portal. However, it's not as easily digestible. There's a little bit of navigating that is required. And so in that data dump, there's a lot of information, a lot of numbers being thrown out at you. But when we talk about it through the lens of equity, when we talk about it through the lens of wanting to see participation from those who have been harmed the most by the war on drugs, from the populations that were targeted by the war on drugs, that information is not as readily available. And if you have seen the Massachusetts Social Equity Report, which we issued last year, April of 2020, one of the recommendations to the Cannabis Control Commission was that they were more transparent with the data as to who they see, who are they collecting information on, who are the people, the players that are in this industry. Traditionally, when we hear people talk about the war on drugs, the numbers constantly point to the fact that Black and brown people have been targeted. They were targeted and they continue to be targeted. So much so that the ACLU in their 2020 report stated that despite Massachusetts, and this is consistent across the board in other states as well, despite Massachusetts going legal, despite cannabis being legal in the state of Massachusetts as of 2016, despite that fact, what we see is a disparity, an increase in the disparity of arrests tied to cannabis. So it didn't matter the fact that we went legal. The war continues to ensue, and it will continue to do so long as we have criminal offenses on the books, so long as cannabis is deemed a Schedule I drug. Law enforcement has the opportunity to exercise their discretion, and there isn't a concerted effort to address that with law enforcement. I'm going to loop back to this issue with law enforcement a little bit later when we talk about the positive impact plans. But it's important that we keep these data points in the context of who's really benefiting from legalization. People don't want to hear the data. They want to sidestep the fact that it is white-owned businesses that are benefiting, while we still have people of color, particularly Black and brown folks, who are still being arrested, still being convicted, still serving time as if they are violent offenders for their participation of a plant that people are making millions and upwards of billions, if you're tracking with some of the mergers that have been happening in the industry across the country, billions of dollars around that. And so that's extremely problematic. When we switching gears back to what's happening in Massachusetts and the decision making and the policy rollout that's happening, we need to hold our commissioners who are regulating this industry accountable for their decisions to be grounded in equity, so that we can see the level of participation where we can say, hey, we've moved the needle. We've shifted gears from saying that we have an increase in disparity of arrest rates, where Black and brown people are 3 times, I think it's 3.6 times more likely to be arrested for a cannabis offense than their white counterparts, despite the fact that Black and white folks participate and use the plants pretty much equitably. They consume it and use it equitably. But when you look at the arrest data, it would tell a different story. That's not what it shows. And so we need to shift to what Commissioner Camargo acknowledged in the meeting yesterday, which is the fact that ownership is power in this industry. The people who own the businesses wield the greatest power. And as regulators, they too own wield significant power, because they influence who are the initial operators, who are the initial folks to get in and open up businesses. And we saw what happened the first 3 years in Massachusetts. So now here we are in 2021, what changes are being made? How are we holding folks accountable? If you did check in with our last our last Equity Minute update, we dug in a little bit about the host community agreements and the benefit that those multi-operators who came in leveraged their network in relationship to people who wrote on Massachusetts legislation, leveraged their well-capitalized pockets, and took advantage of the first movers, took first movers advantage, which allowed them to secure the host community agreements, allowed them to be the first ones to open up and generate revenue and benefit financially from our industry, to the expense and at the disadvantage of our equity program participants. And then some will have you say, well, look at the pipeline. Well, we look at the pipeline and the data that the executive director shared. There are about 1,000, I think it's 1,146 applications that are in queue to be reviewed by the Cannabis Control Commission. And of those, there's roughly about 14%, right? They say that are ready to, 14% are either our licenses, social equity licenses, or economic empowerment certificate licenses. So a combination of 14% represent the equity participants. 14% of that 1,100 licenses of applications that are in queue to be reviewed. Now, why do I highlight that? Because remember, I just said from that 14%, we drop all the way down to only 3% are operational, because from the steps that have to take place to get from having your application submitted to the Cannabis Control Commission to being operational, there are significant numbers of steps that have to happen. One of them being obtaining a provisional license. And when we look at the provisional license, we see a dip. There's only 9% of the provisional licenses that have been issued to equity program participants. And so now you see we constantly see only a fraction. And what we have consistently said, what I have consistently pointed out, is if we go back to holding everybody accountable, every stakeholder accountable for their role in meeting the state mandate for equitable participation, we can see participation in terms of businesses that are operational upwards of 20%, if not more. Now, that would be a huge jump from the meager 3% that we're looking at right now. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the positive impact plans. If you've been tracking with us, you probably have heard our solution. You probably have heard us explain and point out why, when people point to different barriers to entry into this industry in especially Massachusetts, where it's heavily regulated, the PIES program addresses all of those, where every single barrier people look to raise or highlight or flag as to a reason why we're not seeing the needle move for equitable participation. The PIES program addresses that. And so going back to us wanting to be more transparent and hold the commission a little bit more accountable, because it's easy to do these data dumps and get lost and think that, okay, well, we're at 3%, the pipeline shows we have another 14%, we're moving the needle. Well, until we see exactly who the folks are that are operational, we don't actually know if we're moving the needle. We don't have accurate data as we do when we look at who's being arrested, who's being convicted, the type of charges that are being issued, and the demographics around that. We don't see that. And the commission, one of the things in Massachusetts that we have is it's called registered agents. And basically what that means, it doesn't matter if you are an owner, if you are a volunteer, if you are tied to an operating business, a business that's operational in Massachusetts, and that's on both the recreational and the medical side. If you are tied to any entity, you must register with the state. And there is the opportunity to capture not only the demographics of who are the ones that are working in these operating businesses in our industry, but also in what capacity. Are we just seeing Black and brown folks being hired in entry-level positions, scrambling to get a volunteer position just so that they can be part of the legal industry? Or do we see ownership? Do we see board member participation? Do we see diverse board members reflective of those who have been harmed the most by the war on drugs, reflective of those populations that have been targeted, coming from those communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs? These are all data points that the commission can collect, particularly through that registered agent point, and disaggregate it not only on the racial and ethnic demographics, but also in terms of the level of participation? Where are we seeing people participating on the legal side? So going back to what the commission presented yesterday, the other piece to highlight was we're seeing a lot more traction with the delivery license that has rolled out. The commission included the delivery data, meaning those who have a pre-certification to pursue a delivery license in Massachusetts, the courier license particularly, meaning where you're pretty much picking up from a retailer and dropping it off to a consumer, to the customer directly. These licenses, that data is included. And if you are aware of what's happening in Massachusetts, you would know that the delivery license is exclusively, for the first 3 years, exclusively being issued only to equity program participants. And this is an effort to move the needle in the space of ownership. One major highlight that came out of yesterday's meeting is the fact that the wholesale license, or the delivery operator license, that application will be made available this month. And unlike the courier license, this delivery license allows for the operator to warehouse and engage in negotiations and wholesaling contracts where they're able to run a more profitable business, the gist of it. And so those applications, the CCC said, will be made available this month. So we can expect within the next couple of months to see an additional uptick in terms of applicants, the diverse applicants, social equity applicants, economic empowerment participant applicants, them being able to pursue licenses, obtain provisional licenses, and move the needle for our participation in our industry. However, here, when we're looking at it from the lens of equity, we don't want to be pigeonholed into just one license. In fact, we're calling on the Cannabis Control Commission to go back and look at how you have wrapped around services and benefits for economic empowerment certificate holders, for social equity program participants, and limiting them currently. Right now, they're limited to retail product manufacturing, cultivation, and delivery. However, there's an opportunity now to expand this to medical, expand the benefits and the services and support that is given to equity program participants, expand that to include any license that is that the commission oversees, so that then we're not just pigeonholed to a delivery license or to the social consumption license whenever that is made available. Really open up the industry and open up opportunities to pursue licenses in this industry in all facets, research. Micro business also is another license that currently equity program participants can exercise their benefits towards. However, that is not the case when it comes to medical. And this is an opportunity for the Cannabis Control Commission to look at their policies around the medical licenses and think about what can they do from the lens of equity. What can they do to promote equitable participation, particularly when it comes to ownership? Why is it that we do not have any owners of medical marijuana dispensaries in Massachusetts? We have a patient population of 96,000 patients. Again, another data point which would be interesting to see disaggregated what the demographics of those patients are. But we know when it comes to the facilities and where patients can access medical marijuana, these facilities are not owned by those who have been harmed by the war on drugs. They aren't owned by social equity program participants or economic empowerment certificate holders. In fact, we know of at least one economic empowerment certificate holder pursuing a her medical license, working rigorously to do that. And the Cannabis Control Commission pushing back and stating that, oh, well, they can't provide support for that. And when you look at that through the lens of equity and our charge and our mandate for equitable participation, it's not just on the recreational side, it's for the industry. The commission just doesn't regulate recreational cannabis. They regulate both medical and recreational. So why wouldn't we want to support our equity program participants in pursuing all of the potential opportunities for ownership in this industry? And that is a legit question for our commission, right? Why wouldn't we do that? Why are we trying enforcing and forcing the public even? Because the way they present the data, the way they champion the data, it also shapes the mind of the public to think, okay, yeah, we have something for equity folks. They got delivery licenses. Well, that's not equitable participation. That's not fair. That's not just. We're not getting at the needle of moving the needle on social justice, on equity in this industry when we do that. Not at all. We need to open up the opportunities fully. We need to remove barriers in any capacity so that we can see the type of participation we claim we are looking to achieve here in this state. And when we talk about holding the Cannabis Control Commission accountable and wanting them to be transparent, they have the data set that they can provide around that. And so let's see them put that out. We're still waiting on the data around the social equity program participants. Who are these folks who constitute this 470 470, I think 476 folks now we have in our social equity program. And that data isn't made readily available as to when you disaggregate it. Are we reaching the populations that have been traditionally marginalized? Are we reaching those who have been harmed the most by the war on drugs? Are we reaching those who have arrest records and convictions simply because of their participation with cannabis? Are they the ones who are participating in our legal industry? Are they the ones participating in the equity program and able to benefit? Or do we have people who are leveraging an opportunity simply because they live in a zip code or they moved to a zip code that has been deemed disproportionately impacted, and they can demonstrate that they don't make above 400% of the poverty line, and therefore they can qualify. This is important information, because what's going to happen if we don't look at this, if we're not transparent, then we're going to miss the mark and wonder why 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're still saying, oh, well, Massachusetts tried to do something for those who have been harmed, but they just couldn't get their act together. They being those who have been harmed, they being the state of Massachusetts, they being all of us collectively, when in fact we have not taken the time to address the root, address and target the specific audience, the specific populations that have been marginalized and harmed and targeted, to say that we then are creating solutions that will move that needle. So until we do that, we can't say we've exhausted in a bold and intelligible fashion what needs to happen to promote equitable participation, to promote ownership. And I want to just keep going back because it was refreshing to hear Camargo acknowledge what we've been saying here, what I've been saying in on the Equity Minute updates, what was presented in the Massachusetts Social Equity Report, what's presented even in the PIE's write-up, the fact that there's significant power in ownership. And from that power, that's how we can ensure participation. And how do you know that? Again, when we look back at what happened in this meeting yesterday, the Social Justice Commissioner took it upon herself to be explicit and say, when they're looking at renewals now, and this I think is a direct comment to something that we have asked about here on the Equity Minutes, which is the previous commissioners said that businesses, entities that are operating in Massachusetts can hold off on submitting their positive impact plans. And so that, given a leg out, given an opportunity to check out on a responsibility that's intrinsically tied to our state mandate, is a slap in the face for our efforts around equity. And so the Social Justice Commissioner took the time to be explicit and say, she herself is looking directly at these diversity plans and the positive impact plans, not just for provisional licenses, but for the renewals. And she's looking at what these businesses are submitting as what their efforts around positive impact, and weighing them to see, are they actually doing what are they actually positively impacting the plan? And what we saw yesterday were there were 7 licenses, which reflected 4 entities, but because an entity can have more than 1 license. What we saw in yesterday's meeting, where there were 7 licenses that there was a condition placed around their renewal. So it wasn't just a blanket approval of renewals for operations that are open, they're operating, or excuse me, they have a license and they submitted their renewal application. That doesn't necessarily mean they're operational, but they submitted their renewal application. And in their renewal application, you have to demonstrate what have you done to positively impact the community, especially if you've been operational. And so she stated that these 7 licenses, before they're going to issue a renewal, need to come back and address some concerns that she had around what they were doing to positively impact, which includes certain things like updating letters of affirmation saying that certain entities, nonprofits received their funding, explaining how certain donations to an entity ties into our mandate around targeting particular populations. If you aren't aware, the commission put out guidance around positive impact plans, and they identified 5 populations or 5 targeted groups that your entity's positive impact plan can address, that being those who have been harmed the most by the war on drugs, evidenced through arrest records, disproportionately impacted areas, and I will not go over all 5 of them because it's eluding me right now. But that guidance is on their website, and so those who participate in the social equity program, or those who are economic empowerment certificate holders. So they've issued some guidance. What we're seeing here on our from the Cannabis Equity Minutes lens is that there's more guidance that is needed. And why? Because one of the pushback was, donation to the New York Urban League. So my question now becomes, if you are operating in Massachusetts, do you have to positively impact a community in Massachusetts, or can you just give back to any community anywhere in this country, and that's considered positively impacting the community? I would push hard against that. I think businesses, in terms of corporate responsibility, their decision to want to support and go further and beyond what is required for their positive impact plan, I think that makes a lot of good sense. I think there's opportunity as our society moves towards more conscious consumerism. I think that would actually play to their favor. However, when it comes to the regulatory evaluations on renewals and positive impact plans, they need to be grounded in the impact these businesses are having in Massachusetts, because this is where they're benefiting from. They're benefiting from the Massachusetts residents. So I thought that was an interesting piece. Again, what we don't see is a structure, right? We don't see a structure for how the regulatory body, the commission, is evaluating these positive impact plans. And what do I mean by a structure? Yes, they give guidance. And in that guidance, they say they want to see what the goal is, who the audience is, and what are the metrics that the business is using to determine that they have met their goal. Now, what do I mean by there isn't structure? Well, for example, when we looked at the provisional licenses that were issued, there were only about 17 licenses issued in this round. And we had 2 provisional licenses issued to 2 separate entities pursuing a cultivation license. Now, one entity was pursuing a cultivation license, maxing out what any entity in the state of Massachusetts can pursue, which is 100,000 square foot of canopy. Now, this entity stated that they were going, for their positive impact plan, that they were going to hire from areas of disproportionate impact, I think 25%. Now, juxtapose that to another licensee that was up for provisional license review and for cultivation, a cultivation license, and they're pursuing a tier 3 license, which is roughly 10 to 20,000 square feet. So we have two different tiers here, right? We have two different capacities when we're looking at entities pursuing an opportunity in our state. And this second entity, the one pursuing a smaller footprint, if you will, their commitment was to support 3 social equity or economic empowerment certificate holders' efforts to open up a cannabis business. Now, from the perspective of equity, and you're looking at both of these businesses were up for provisional licenses. Both of these businesses technically were granted provisional license. Now, the one that said that they were hiring, it appears based on what the commission discussed, that they did submit additional information for their positive impact plan around a curriculum, a science curriculum, I think, that they're going to roll out to the community as part of their positive impact plan. And this is why I say structure is needed, because here it is, that footprint of 100,000 square feet of canopy, the opportunity in terms of the what this company is able to generate and glean from our Massachusetts industry, if you will, in comparison to this other business, much smaller, a fraction of it, 10,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet if they maximize for that particular license, right? And their way of positively impacting aren't commensurate at all. One is going to host a couple of classes, science classes. The other one is going to empower. They've committed to empowering at least 3 businesses. Now, empowering 3 businesses might not sound like a big deal if their commitment is just to host a couple of classes, but their goal is to empower 3 businesses to open up a cannabis business in this industry, which means they're going to support them. They're going to support them in numerous facets, each of these individuals, to open up and empower them. Again, the social justice chair has made known to the public and reiterated what we have been saying, but from her position, from her seat of power, she has identified what power looks like, what strong power looks like, which is ownership. And here it is, we have 2 entities, the smaller of the 2 entities, and let's be all the way transparent. The second entity is a MBE. It's a DBE, a minority-owned business that is identifying, okay, this is how I positively impact a community. This is how I make a difference in this cannabis industry. I hold my responsibility for the charge of equitable participation. And these larger entities, especially these entities that came in as multi-state operators, and the Massachusetts is just another footprint in their grand scheme of what their businesses are doing. Their attunedness, if you will, to how to really positively impact is not being challenged. And this is why we say structure is important. This is, again, and so here's a problem that we're identifying that's problematic for a business to be able to generate and pursue 100,000 square feet and simply say that they're going to hire from disproportionately impacted communities. Well, you know what? You need staff. You need staff. So you're going to be hiring folks anyways. And that's really more of a diversity issue, because when you hire diverse staff, that's a benefit for your company. You're bringing in that diverse staff. You're also going to be able to bring in diverse clientele. And there's enough research to support and show that, regardless of the industry. So the hiring of staff, despite what the equity guidance says, that actually, the equity guidance that the CCC has put out, that actually should fall in a diversity plan, not under positively impacting the community. I think it should be a requirement. Basically, it was a requirement for economic empowerment certificate holders, and through the lens of equity, economic empowerment certificate holders should not be held to a higher standard than multi-state operators or well-capitalized businesses. in essence, you're creating a greater barrier. So if the expectation is that economic empowerment certificate holders hire diverse staff, hire from disproportionately impacted communities, that they have contracts from people who have been harmed by the war, from businesses that are owned by people who have been harmed by the war on drugs, that they demonstrate 50% of their contracts are going to one of these targeted populations. If that's the expectation for economic empowerment certificate holders, the expectation for these well-capitalized businesses, these businesses that have a large footprint in our industry, should be higher as well. And this is what we're talking about, structure. And when we talk about the PIES program, we have consistently said that that's the expectation around the PIES program. Can you imagine if we had all of these businesses, if this business said that they can commit to 3, and the other business that I mentioned that's pursuing a tier 11, and they're able to benefit from an expedited process because of the license type, they commit to maybe 3 times as much, despite the fact that their footprint is 10 times as much. So they're committing to 9, supporting 9 equity program participants in their efforts to open up a cannabis business. And when the way the PIES program is, we're not talking about any type of predatory deal. We're not talking about them having to give an ownership stake. No, not at all. This is how you positively impact. This is the positive impact requirement, part of your renewal requirement. This is part of your charge for the mandate that we have equitable participation. This is the type of structure we're talking about. Now, an example of how the industry or the regulatory body recognizes structure, both of these businesses are not paying the same for the license. Depending on the license type, the fees are different. The greater the footprint, the greater the licensing fee. And so what we're saying is, if positively impacting the community is just as important, then we should see that type of structure. I presented the PIES program as a solution that really gets at all of these elements. It gets at the barriers that the equity program participants traditionally face. It gets at the charge and the responsibility that the existing and operating entities have. And it fosters a relationship. It sets a tone. One of the things that I heard another commissioner in another industry, this is in a previous life, when we were dealing with education policy, and this is again around equity, the statement was made that, you can't change people's hearts overnight. However, you can regulate and change their behavior. And over time, it will have an impact on their hearts. And so what does that look like? Well, if the expectation is that businesses support the equity charge, support the equitable participation charge, if the expectation is that how they positively impact a community will be weighed against their footprint in our industry, and they're going to be held accountable in a transparent fashion, their behavior is going to change. And it's going to create a culture that is more reflective of what people have stated that they want to see. When you look back at the Cannabis Joint Policy Commission's committee's meeting that they had earlier this week for the Massachusetts legislature, you heard people talking about, we want to see equity. We need to support equity, and host community agreements have been one area of a barrier for our equity program participants, for us being able to see equitable participation in the industry. So the rhetoric is there. What we're saying here is, let's see the action behind it. And how do you regulate that action? Well, we have a vehicle in place. This doesn't require any changes, that's the beauty of this, right? We can see changes immediately. We can see impact, immediately on our equity participation. It simply requires the Cannabis Control Commission tweaking their policy, if you will, or simply stating, in the same vein that they push back on diversity. When they see a diversity plan that says, oh, they're going to have, 10% women. And traditionally, this is going back to the previous commissioners, they would say, oh, that's not enough. We need to see more. We need to see, we come back with an updated diversity plan. So the provisional license would have a condition that their diversity plan needs to be more realistic or have greater participation in terms of gender diversity, and in some cases, racial ethnic diversity. They didn't always push back on it, but in some cases they did. And so they are able to do it in that capacity when it comes to diversity plans, then they have the same authority and ability to do that when it comes to the positive impact plans and say, hey, we need to see you doing more. To say simply that you're going to donate, money to a cause, which I'm glad to see that they are now looking at the actual causes that they're donating to. And I think there needs to be a deeper look, not just to say that they're given to the vets. I think that was one of the ones, the New England Veterans Associations and the social justice chair. And I think one of the other commissioner, I think Commissioner Stebbins may have also, because there have been times where he's also pushed back and say, well, how does this help us address one of the targeted populations for equitable participation based on the equity guidance and the positive impact plan? So I think that is a step in the right direction. We need to see greater emphasis on supporting power. And you see what happens. The social justice chair highlighted another one of the provisional licensees, and I think it was an economic empowerment certificate holder. As a matter of fact, she highlighted two. One that was up for provisional because this economic empowerment certificate holder had not, they're not operational, but yet she was pleased to see that they were still committed to positively impacting the community, and they submitted a plan, whereas the previous commissioners said, hey, look, even if you're operational, you don't have to do it. So again, when you look at it through the lens of equity, that's the type of accountability we need to see, and we need to see more of it. But I do want to highlight that the two businesses that she took the time out to say, hey, their positive impact plans were strong, were economic empowerment certificate holders. And the one that was up for provisional license, the one that she highlighted, their positive impact plan, again, another example of an entity that was committed. Now they're opening up a retail facility. I think they were up for 2 retail licenses. So that's 2, when you think about footprint, right? 2 retail licenses. And their commitment is to support an economic empowerment and a social equity. And I'm not quite sure if it was and support them to open up a cannabis business. Again, another example of a positive impact plan that recognizes if you wield the power position, you're going to get the participation and the presence. You're going to get that. If we simply focus in, and this is what PIES does, so let's focus in on that at that crux through ownership. And that's what these two businesses, these businesses that the social justice chair highlighted that they're doing. And we'll see next year when they go up for renewal, what was the impact of that? Do we see a pipeline being created by businesses that are willing to commit to implementing a version of the PIES program, if you will? Now, when I say, the reason why I consistently bring up the PIES program is because we could make it easier on businesses so that they don't have to try to figure it out. And if you are a business that wants to support and wants to understand, well, how can I do this in a meaningful way that's going to result in outcomes that have an impact, that are measurable, and demonstrate a level of leadership in this area, reach out to us. We can talk about how we can implement the PIES program. But we do see businesses that are doing their version of it, and we're gonna look to see, does the commission hold these licenses accountable when it's time for renewal? And what impact does that have on our equitable participation when we look at who own businesses that are operational in the state? So with that, I did quite a bit of of digging into the positive impact plans because it's important, right? I'm constantly hearing, I'm reminded of how the previous social justice chair and actually I think it was one of the social equity vendors talked about the PIES program as some type of handout. And it was just alarming to say that something that would address the handout that's given out to big businesses that have a strong footprint in our industry, and then they're not being held responsible for positively impacting in a commensurate way. That's a handout. That's an offense to the residents of Massachusetts because they could do more, and our regulatory body has not regulated in a way that ensures that. And so here it is. That's the call. That's the charge. Let's see that. Let's see us have positive impact that results in a data point, because the data is going to tell you the story, especially when we start, especially if the commission commits to being transparent with the data, holding themselves accountable to saying, okay, we know who has been affected by the war on drugs. We know who has arrests in Massachusetts. We are gathering the data on who are the business owners, who are the registered agents, what roles do they have. Let's put this information out there and show the community where we are, what we're doing, and how we're moving the needle on equity. And until we see that, we're going to continue to dig in. We're going to continue to hold them accountable. And again, one of the things that we noticed in yesterday's meeting was that some of that information, the provisional license that where the positive impact plan is outlined, may not necessarily be the same documentation that's given to the Cannabis Control Commission for renewal. And so it would be important through the lens of equity, right, and accountability and transparency, for the commission to share that information, to say, hey, for the renewal process, XYZ companies submitted these documents, and for their positive impact plan, they committed to doing this goal, and they met, these were their metrics, and these were the metrics that they met, these were the metrics that they did not meet, and these were new metrics that they added, and that in place of the ones that they didn't meet. I think that's a fair enough data point to be shared with the public when it comes to transparency and accountability. But to that end, we're going to wrap it up. And in the upcoming meetings, we'll probably take a look more in terms of on the grander scheme of what's happening. There aren't many meetings happening in the state of Massachusetts. Well, the state commission, their next meeting hasn't been scheduled yet. So we're looking at most likely in June. Some of the things coming down the pike in June is for that next meeting include the delivery wholesale operator license. So when that drops, we'll make sure to make that known. And potentially the social equity program, third cohort, may be opening up. The commission did talk about it a little bit, and some of the measures that they're going to be looking to provide better services. So we'll look to see if they are providing better services. And what do I mean by better services? The social equity program, one, needs to be opened up to economic empowerment certificate holders. And if it is, that needs to be communicated, because I've spoken with economic empowerment certificate holders who say they don't have access to the resources that social equity program participants have. And for both of these cohorts, for both of these cadres of people to be part of the equity program, and for the economic empowerment certificate holders to actually have legislative standing, and for the commission to deny resources, supports, and opportunities that can help move them in their efforts for business, knowing full well that the charge for an economic empowerment certificate holder is to open up a cannabis operation in Massachusetts. That's the reason why they obtained the certificate. I think that, again, it goes against equity. This is the commission regulating against equity. So that's another opportunity for the commission to just revise their policy and ensure that they're promoting and maximizing every opportunity available for equitable participation, particularly when it comes to ownership. So we'll be seeing how that rolls out. We'll also be seeing what the social equity cohort looks like. If the Cannabis Control Commission will be transparent in providing the data as to who were they able to reach and recruit into the program. And of those who are getting licenses, what is the demographic? How many of them actually have arrests? Because when you do the disaggregate of the program participants, we may be missing the mark. But until that transparency is made, until that information is provided, we simply have to go off of the narrative and the way that they're shaping and presenting the data that they're picking and choosing to present to us. So that's been enough on that end. Stay tuned also on the national front. A final data point I'll leave you with is we have 50 states, 15 operational. We have legal, and we have another 2 that will be legal by the summer's end. And then we have about another 33 states that have some form of legislative measure to either legalize recreationally or at least introduce medical marijuana into their state. And why does this matter? That means we would be looking at 45 out of 50 states in this country, probably by the end of this year, having some form of legal cannabis laws on their books. And yet, what does that mean for equity? What does that mean for social justice on the national front? And even if we do legalize it on the national front, legalizing it means monetizing it, and monetizing it for big businesses, monetizing it for the government through taxation. How are we addressing the actual drug war? Have we moved the needle in ending that war? Meaning, have we descheduled it? Have we decriminalized it? Have we released anyone who is serving time for simply a non-violent drug offense? Mississippi just gave life to a Black man because it was his 3rd offense, and it was because he had about 1.5 ounces of weed on him. They gave him life. This is this week, May 2021. So until we are addressing that root, everything else that we're talking about in terms of legalizing is simply moving business as usual, status quo. And so any effort that we can on the legal side with those states that are operational here in Massachusetts to promote ownership so that we can have the opportunity for people to have legal participation and benefit, and on the legal side monetarily, until we have that, we haven't done anything when it comes to addressing the war on drugs. And with that, have a good evening. Thank you for joining me. And those of you who know Mass Mother Mary, you know, my husband is there supporting as well, is here supporting as well. So hence the Freudian slip at times with the us, right? But your Cannabis Equity Minutes with Cynthia Mompoint. Check out the blog. Feel free to leave a comment wherever you're checking this out, whether it's on YouTube, or any of the other social media platforms, Facebook, questions, comments, and we will get back to you guys as quickly as possible. And reach out to your legislator. They are still accepting public comment on the Joint Cannabis Policy Committee, you know, and the fact that they're accepting public comments on host community agreements, do like the legislative body, like they do, put in a comment about equity, about real equity, and tell them that they need to have the governor and the treasurer and the appointing bodies basically hold the commissioners accountable for equitable participation. They need to turn around. You know, Hoffman sent a letter out to the legislative body for HCAs. Well, where's the legislative letter, Hoffman, for, this is Chairman Hoffman, where's the letter for the social equity bill, social consumption? We need to see these types of things, because these are the bills that target a particular population. And make sure when you're doing it for social equity, you include economic empowerment. But that's it. Equity Minutes, Cannabis Equity Minutes with Cynthia Mompoint. Tune in on Tuesday and have a wonderful evening. Good evening, everyone. On this Friday evening, it's May 14th, 2021.